So hello, good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I see people are trickling in. Thank you very much for joining us for this. This is the first of our research seminars in this academic year. So, sort of the UK academic year system in 2021-2022. We're very excited to have you here with us. Many apologies for our delayed start. We had some technical issues, but all that's resolved now. So thank you very much for your patience and for hanging in there with us. So we look forward to rewarding that patience with an exciting conversation today on a very pertinent issue. We have an amazing panel here to discuss this concern today. Our two speakers, and then we have our discussant as well. So I'll just note that today the seminar is titled Decolonisation of Research Methodologies, and the conversation today is going to be about a project that's been carried out on this here at King's College London, that has really been focusing on concerns around decolonisation and internationalisation at King's College London itself, and is focusing on decolonisation of research methodologies at postgraduate level. So the project has been, in a sense, engaging with postgraduate research students and postgraduate students on master's programs as well. And the presentation we should hear today we'll be discussing some of the key findings from the project. I believe it's in early stages, but our speakers are very keen to hear from all of you, around some of their findings as well. Okay, so we have with us Lorena Johnson-Prince, who's a PhD student in leadership studies with reference to security and development, and a research assistant at the African Leadership Center as well. And her research focuses on analyzing the interaction between transnational criminal organizations, communities, and the state through a leadership as process lens. We also have our other speaker, Damilola Adegoke, who's a research associate with the African Leadership Center, and his PhD thesis, which is now completed really, has explored the roles and the place of big data and security leadership decision-making in crisis situations. Damilola is also the head and chief data analyst of the ALC's Data Lab, and is on the steering committee and is a board member of the Digital Sociology Group of the International Sociology Association. So those are the speakers we have with us today. We have a discussant, Clement Stefaniako, who I'm so pleased has been able to make it. And we'll say a bit more about him when we introduce him after the presentation. So with that, I'm going to invite our speakers to please take the stage. Lorena and Damilola, I believe Lorena will be leading us in, and Damilola will pick up from there. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So Lorena, the floor is yours, please.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us on this seminar. Damilola, if you could share the presentation, that would be great. All right, thank you, everyone. Like I said, good morning or good afternoon. I welcome you to this ALC research seminar on decolonising research methodologies. I just wanted to give a brief introduction before my colleague Damilola gives a presentation of the results and the findings from our project. But as a researchers and thinkers, I guess we are constantly asked to kind of reflect on our research methods, the various outcomes we have and the impacts it has on society, as well as our ability to challenge those existing methods as well. And with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused many researchers to adapt and find new and innovative ways to do research, it's opened up more of a discussion on the role of research and how researchers make decisions, how our spatial dimensions interact with that as well, and also how research is conducted. So it is this understanding that has opened our discussion and our project on the decolonisation of research methodologies. This seminar aims to present some of our initial results and findings from our project, which is still work in progress. So we hope to share it with you. We're open to questions, and we just aim to open up this debate, particularly at postgraduate level, relating to King's College. So this is where our project comes from, and this is where it stems. So prior to getting into all those findings, etc., I just wanted to kind of situate our project among current literature regarding decolonisation and research methodologies. So under the umbrella of decolonisation itself, Barnes, for instance, argues that decolonising methodologies is about bringing together a number of critical indigenous liberation and feminist methodologies to strengthen decolonised research. So as a baseline, for instance, with the works of Smith or the works of Dr. Novu Gacchini, it's kind of removing the idea that research is a dirty word from research and from work. So that's kind of the idea that we're working with and where our research kind of provides its baseline. It's kind of asking questions of whose research is it and who owns it, whose interest does our research serve, who's writing up the research, who does our research benefit, how is it perpetuated in the world, and also what is methodology anyway? What is the basis of that? It's trying to answer those critical questions and looking at the theories around it and how those theories fit into different cultural situations. So it's this kind of basis of literature that has kind of fueled the underpinning of our work. At King's, it's a globally renowned institution. So King's strives to build an international community and serve that international community. So with core values like cultural competency, global problem solving, it's at the front of that internationalization debate. So our project really hopes to kind of draw on that dialogue and be a link between what postgraduate students are thinking around the topic. So from this, these were the following aims of our project. So the aims of our project were to understand what postgraduate students understand by the term decolonised methodology and what it means for the philosophical underpinnings and application of their work. The second goal was to address what decolonised methodologies look like at King's by conducting a survey across the 9 faculties with postgraduate students who have completed their fieldwork. These included masters and doctoral students. And the third goal was to follow the survey by virtual meetings. So just to really unpack what those answers were given and kind of build on their understanding of what a decolonised methodology looks like at King's. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Damiola, to actually give some of the results, and so we can have a really interesting conversation leaving. Thanks, Damiola.
Thank you. So thank you, Norina, for that for that nice introduction. So what we have done, there's no need for me to repeat what we've done. I think you've done a very good job introducing that. I would like to share my slide now so that I can present the, sorry. My role here is to present our findings. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah. Yes, we can see your screen, Damiola. Yes.
All right. Sorry, yes. Yeah, I'm gonna my duty on this. On this panel is to present the findings, our results and findings, and do a little bit of analysis. But I think I need to make some clarification before doing that. First, our intention is for this particular session is not to do a kind of expansive, this is not the completed work, this is a preliminary work. So we're just presenting preliminary findings from the survey that we carried out. So it's not going to be heavy on theory and literature or concepts. So, and then it's not about analysis. We're not doing the kind of in-depth analysis of what decolonization is. People have done, they have written a lot on that. What we are doing, without like repeating what Lorena said, just to provide a little bit of a kind of background to the results in a way that you will understand what the results are all about, is to find a way to fill in the gap, because most of the studies on theorizing about the concept, essays and articles written that even around the narrative of decolonization and the philosophy or the principles behind that, or even the etymology of decolonization. So our work, this project is not about that. What we've done is to find a way to test some of those ideas in the literature on a particular segment of a colonial university like a university that is in a colonial country, former colonial country like the King's College in the UK. So we thought it would be good for us to assess the opinions of mostly postgraduate students, because that is also one reason, part of the reasons why we had to do this, because most of the studies focused mainly on researchers from third world, pardon the use of third world, from developing countries. So rather than the point of view of the students, so we thought to assess their views on how they carry out their research and the idea behind that. So since all research, because you have like in all research studies, you have your concept and theory, and at the same time you also have your methodology. So the theory is about the concept, while the theory is about the context. So what we are looking at is the context of the knowledge content, the epistemological context behind some of the research is carried out by these people. So what we did was to conduct a survey. We itemized specific questions that we used. So we drew these questions from the literature. The questions are around assessing the location of studies, the power hierarchy behind the studies, who are the people doing the studies, those funding the studies, where the studies take place, even the knowledge, the database behind the study. We thought to assess some of these things, and we had to operationalize them in questions that we asked some of the students. Also in a way for us to test if they were familiar with any other methodological or knowledge approaches that are different from Euro-America-centric approaches. So we're able to assess that and also to saw their opinion on some of the things that we highlighted. What we also did was we carried out a kind of virtual interviews, focus group discussion around the subject. So so I'm presenting our findings right away. So this meme that I've shared is about decolonized science. I'm here doing participant observation, the hashtag anthropology. Yeah, the first, let me go straight into the results. About the people that after administering the questionnaire over a period of like 2 or 3 months, Lorena, you can chip in if at any point. So the approach we are trying to use is going to be a kind of discursive approach. So we are going to take questions and comments from people. I think the chair is going to handle that anyway. You can also type in your questions and also your comments in the chat box. Some people are already doing that. 62% of those people that submitted, that participated in the participants in the questionnaires were female. And we also have like 31% male. Those who are non-binary, 3%, and we have 4% people prefer not to say. I think percentages would be better understood when we place that side by side the population of study or the sample of study. So we intended to, because something is still ongoing, we are to also like it's still open for people to also fill in and also to contribute. This is just like an aspect. What we are presenting aspects of this. Of our research, of the findings and the results, in a way also, because what we also thought to do was to, in a way, to develop an instrument that will aid those working in this in this field so that you also can adapt some of, we're going to make, at the end of the day, we're going to make our questions available so that you can adapt that for your own studies in case you are in that, you are interested in doing that. So we at the end of the day, we out of about, we opened, this was an open questionnaire online. We use COBOL application for designing, to design the questionnaire. So we had about close to 80 participants in all. And then, so out of the 80, we had like 62% female, and these are the figures of those the participation. So we had a kind of overwhelming female representation at the end of the day. Also, we also did a kind of ethnicity because it will be important in the research of this nature to look at, to see how we can place this side by side, what the literature is saying around the subject. So we discovered that survey was dominated by white European and white British participants, as seen from the chart on the screen now. So we had unfortunately, permit me to use that word to dominate this particular study. But try as we did, we tried so hard to get them to participate. And in a way, that also, because I had a discussion with a senior scholar, senior colleague, who said that their literature surrounding that the non-participation of mostly Black African scholars in research of this nature. So we hope this is not in a way trying to strengthen or refute that. It's too early for us to draw that conclusion. But we notice the preponderance, dominance of white British and white European, and even those who are non-British too. We had that in high significant number. And what we also find, I mean, contrary to the observation that most, let's say, the minorities like Black Africans don't like to participate, we notice low participation from the Indian and the Latinos, who are also part of the minority, and also white Irish. So we only had very high, I mean, from the other, because we could explain that by saying that, okay, since the survey was conducted in the UK, so that might probably explain why the population of, I mean, those who dominated that survey, I mean, they were white British and white European.
Damilola, I'm so sorry to interject. So I think there's an internet issue that makes you speak very quickly. So if you could just slow down just a little bit. Sorry about that. I think there's an internet. Yeah. I sent a message. But I think
okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Okay. Now, so these are the what we did was to break down this in the analysis parts to reflect the gender distribution of the participants by ethnicity. So we noticed that there were more white female and then I mean white European non-British female and white British female participants in the survey. So the faculties, as expected, we had 51% of those the participants were from I mean they were from social science and public policy, and followed by humanities and psychiatry, psychology. I'll reflect upon that in our discussion or at a later part of the presentation, really. So we had a very, very low turnout from natural sciences, partly because some of them felt that this particular problem is not part of their own problem, that it's a social science problem, really. And we also faced some objections along that line. And when we requested for data, I think I should say this, we didn't get much cooperation from that end, because what we try to do, while accessing, because we have to look at those, when you're looking at power relations in decolonization of methodologies, we wanted to find out the staff-student ratio by ethnicity to examine, I mean, the representation of faculty members by ethnicity. But we couldn't get that from the natural sciences, and I think that's not only from natural sciences. King's, we hope they will be more open to that in the future in the course of the remainder part of the research. And the departments, we had geography followed by African Leadership Center as expected, because myself and my colleagues we are from the African Leadership Center. So we had, these are the department, the distribution by departments. And we also asked the doctoral, we had like the 86% of the participants from what do you call it? They are doctoral students, while 14% masters. So on research objectives, from the literature, research objectives could be categorized into this like exploration trying to understand what the phenomena of study is about, explanation also to explain, and also theory testing, and also about theory building and investigation. So most social sciences and humanities research objectives could be categorized under that. So when we did an analysis of the research objectives, so we asked them to provide their research objectives, we noticed that most of the research objectives, 30%, about 30%, are explanatory, just to explain particular phenomenon, followed by investigation to investigate, to ask questions, to find out about specific phenomena, and also about understanding 24%. But theory testing and theory building, very rarely, we didn't really see much theory building or theory testing in that regard, whether from those who are Black students or the white students. So to be theory testing fine, but theory building, like we had no statistics for that. People really, they didn't do much of theory building. Rather, we had people adopting European and American methodologies to their research, using that to explain specific phenomena. Even if those, the notes of the location of their research, it's, even if the locations are outside of Europe, you will find out that many of them used methodologies and theories developed by European environment, and applying that to the developing developing countries where the location of their research is situated rather. So we didn't, nothing like theory building and theory testing. That in a way could also explain why this particular research is very necessary, because if you can't do a kind of decolonization of methodologies, when even the theories for explaining that decolonization or the theory for explaining some of our social phenomena are heavily skewed towards Europe and Western theories. Yeah, so we asked these questions. These are extras from some of the questions and their responses. Do you use or intend to use any non-European or non-American academic journal databases for your work? We asked them this. 56% of them answered no, that they had no intention of using non-European or non-American academic journal databases for your work. We did a kind of follow-up questions to find out why that's in the virtual sessions, and also as part of the questions that we put on the survey, the question items, to find out why they expressed that that idea of disinterestedness in using some of them mentioned availability. I don't know. Yeah, some of them mentioned availability, non-availability of maybe journal databases outside of Europe and America. So we noticed also on the list of academic top 15 academic and journal databases that they used, JSTOR, it's around, like the top the academic databases, and it's based in the USA. So looking at the table that is before you, you could see that aside from South Africa, they didn't use any databases from the rest of the sub-Saharan Africa continent, and even in Asia. That's apart from China. So most of these databases are located in USA, Netherlands, like Scopus, just JSTOR, PubMed, Project Muse, Science Direct, and what have you. So apart from African journals online from South Africa and African Security Review that some people mentioned, there's this absence of, or near absence of, academic and journal databases from the continent in their work. Do you use or intend to use research data sets not produced in Europe or America for your work? just like the other one, 61% answered no in the negative, no, that they had no intention of using research databases that are not the data sets that are not produced in Europe or America. Also, these are the list of research data sets. Some said they would develop their own, and then we had some from Chile, South Africa, Afrobarometer in Ghana, and what have you. So most of the works are heavily skewed towards some of these former colonial powers or countries, really. Yeah, so have you drawn on non-European or non-American archives for your work? Yeah, 61% answered in the negative also, that they've not drawn on, that archives are on non-European or non-American archives for their work. So they acknowledge the fact that their works are, the archives or the sources of the data for their work, for their research or thesis, based in non-European and they are based in American and European institutions, really. If yes, list example of these archives. Some give the Arusha that's international, that's ICTR in Arusha, Sarajevo Library. Then there's Australian War Memorial and some of these archives that they listed there. If no, kindly explain why you are not using that. Some 90% actually claim that the archives were not relevant to their work. Then access issues, that, okay, we couldn't access some of these archives, then travel restrictions due to COVID and other, then the use of other sources outside of archival studies. Do you cite or consult with non-European and non-American scholars for your research? Yeah, now talking about references, 82% answered in the affirmative that they use and they consult with non-European and non-American scholars for their research. About research methodology, we did a kind of word cloud analysis to see. So most of these are like qualitative based, really, ethnography, ethnography, case studies, and what have you. Have you had access to research methodology training? 4% answered yes. Then we asked questions around what do you understand by the decolonisation of research methodology, and these are the extracts from their responses. Now, some say we had somebody responding that countering dominance, that decolonisation of research methodology is about countering dominant Western-based methodology, and they need to recenter other non-Western research methodologies into mainstream methodologies. They could be African, Asian, or Latin America. Then also the use of African methodologies in research and African theoretical frameworks in order to nativize research and make it African in nature. Another respondent advocated for to develop Asian methods for Asian subjects, for example. Then not treating Europe and US as the only universal examples of humans and considering other human beings on Earth as humans and not exotic. Then the last, we also had a kind of response that resonated with some of those things I highlighted earlier, stepping back from the dominant white Western male traditions of conducting research, all the way to how research is communicated and operationalized. Then we had some responses like, okay, some of the respondents actually expressed this. I understand the decolonisation of research to be an overly woke buzz phrase with little concrete definition, problematic parameters, and little to no concrete value added to serious research beyond the generating of important conversations within the halls of academia. Then we had somebody who also responded, I would rather not waste my time thinking about it. We also had these very interesting responses. I'm sorry you have to waste your time putting out stupid, politically correct surveys such as this. Then another one, critical theories garbage is fundamentally not compatible with liberal democracy. And there was also this, nothing, because the concept of colonized research methodology versus decolonized research methodology looks unsubstantiated to me. A methodology developed according to the research design. There's no such thing, at least after the 1970s, that appear to have to be driven or biased by colonization or an outcome of colonization. It's very interesting to note that all those respond, because we anonymize the data quite all right, but there are some categories that we use to also, for the analysis. All of them are white male anyway, those who express this opinion about what they understand by the colonization of research methodology. Yeah, so what is the study location of your research? They talked in countries apart from the United. If you take UK and US, we had locations like Australia, Belgium, Canada, Germany, India, and Kenya as top location of research studies. Yeah, so then there's this, for the virtual meetings highlights, we had people talk about white savior narratives coming out very strongly. That's the staff-student dialogue, the need for staff-student dialogue. Then also like talking about patriarchy, leadership, diversity, expression of diversity, and about flexible privileges. Then no one size fits all. Then they also advocated for storytelling and as another alternative for a narrative instead of the usual quant-qual focus. Of research by most researchers based in this Europe and America. Yeah, so those are our results for now. We are going to take feedback. So we are still open for more, to get more data, and also kind of open a kind of collaboration for opportunity for workshops to work together and to see how we can test this across different universities outside of King's and maybe outside of the UK. So we're open to collaboration and also feedback. So I'm going to pause for now to allow the discussants to take on the floor. Madam Chair, so I think I've done justice to that. Thank you. Eka.
Thank you very much for that. To Lorena and to Damilola. I hope our colleagues who are listening in and hopefully will be participating shortly will agree with me that these are some very interesting findings you have, even if we're at initial stages of analysis. Thank you so much for sharing this work with us at this early stage. I've seen the comments and questions coming through. Really, really appreciate those. Please keep them coming through. We are going to address them in a moment. But before we delve into that, it is my distinct pleasure to now welcome Clement Stefaniako, who is a Doctor of Philosophy candidate with 2 Masters of Arts degrees from the UK and from Ghana, across a range of themes: history, population studies, security, and development. Clement also, I'm very, very pleased to say, is an alumnus of the African Leadership Center. So he's undertaking this PhD at La Trobe University in Australia, of course. And he's very, very well equipped to actually offer some very insightful comments on what we've just heard now. So Clement, please, can I welcome you to please offer your own thoughts on what you've heard now? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eka. And that's a brilliant presentation there, Lorena and Damilola. Whilst you gave the presentation, a few things ran through my mind. And the talking point there, I get a sense that there's a certain degree of frustration among people you engaged. But of course, your explanation of that is that potentially came from white British, white Western guys who have their own biases. And, especially when you ask the question, what do you understand decolonization research to be? Some of the responses are quite harsh and and understandably so. And then, of course, when you asked questions about what researchers intend to use, the kinds of databases, the kind of theories, everything is pointed to the West. And if you put all that together, the question really that we constantly need to reflect on, and which is still very important, is what really is decolonialism and decolonizing methodology. Do we really have any, does it really have any meaning at all? Especially if you look at it, and I'm looking at decolonialism in the context as well of nationalism, especially if you look at its source from the mid-1940s, 1950s, and the fact that that's really decolonialization is an offshoot of the previous eras of nationalist ideologies that really also is not outside the context of Western Europe, really. Because if you go back to the eras of the 18th and 19th centuries, you find Great Britain and France, for instance, leading those Western nationalism along the lines at the time when Europe was industrializing. And so you find that when Europeans were advancing the ideas of nationalism, they were doing it within the context of industrialization and democracy. And so countries were pushing for their own ideologies within their cultural context. Now, fast forward to the 1950s and 1960s, when Africans and those from the Orientals were also agitating for nationalist ideologies. At the time, in contrast to what Europeans asserted at the time of nationalism, Africans and those in the East were also clamoring for nationalism, but at the time, considering their own cultures as backward and their economies as retrogressive, and embracing these global standards of progress. And so you would find that sharp contrast, Great Britain, France, nationalizing and embracing what they had, Africans nationalizing and doing away with what they had. So that contrast is there. So you find that in the end, in the 1950s, 1960s, Africans began to accept the standard of progress proposed by the West, by Western Europe. No matter how you look at it, no matter how you see that as a disagreement, that the fact that we are in King's College having this conversation already suggests that we cannot argue too much against that point. And whilst we were accepting Western ideologies, of progress, for instance, we were also at the same time pretending to reject the culture of colonialism and then the culture of our ancestors. I mean, what we call ancestors, people define it with all kinds of derogatory definitions, backwardness, what is African, what is indigenous, and then accepting progress defined by Europe. And so many scholars, especially this has been well developed in India as well, many scholars think that the concept of nationalism, the concept of decolonization, is both imitative and hostile to the Western models of nationalism. And so how then do we, and of course, at the same time, so we find many people, many types of nationalism emerging that are very, very particularistic and alien to other people within the context, but also outside. So you find things like xenophobia emerging as a form of nationalism, as a form of decolonial thinking, confusing so many things along that line. Racism coming along those lines. And so as we develop these theories of decolonial methodologies, decolonial thinking, how are we distinguishing, all these toxic thinking of nationalism from what we consider to be decolonial theories? What is decolonial methodology really? And so when you ask these people questions and then there's confusion about what it is, we really need to get back and not think that people give those responses because they are white or they don't understand the context of the conversation. I think they do understand. The problem is that decolonial research is in itself entangled with a lot of confusion and ambivalence that has to be unpacked. And even as we do it, and I think we can't even do it in a better place than where you are at King's College. We need to ask ourselves very important questions. And you know, some of the ways, especially if you look at decolonial theories, nationalism, all those kinds of thinking, and how some are very anti-indigenous, anti-local, and some have also turned out to be dehumanizing, because if you look at it in terms of xenophobia, racism, even Nazist German also had that nationalist ideology, kind of let's maintain what we have and grow it and not the others, you know, those kind of thinking. Now, many scholars have thought that maybe this is just, we can look at that in terms of the theory of development and say, in the beginning, things can be rough, like in the 1950s, 1970s of Africa, but with time, things will improve. But it's still along the same thinking of Western European ideology of progress, and without really pausing to think about what we mean by decolonialism, decolonial research, decolonial theories. What if we actually just imposing colonial products on ourselves to assume we are doing decolonial research, when in fact, and you attest to it, Damilula and Lorena, your research suggests that people really don't even think about, even if their research is in Western Europe, they are thinking about Western concepts. They are thinking about using Western-based databases. They are thinking about everything Western, and then we are doing decolonial research. And the point I'm trying to make here is that we shouldn't look at those instances as exceptional, but it's the norm, really. In the context of decolonial research, we need to reflect deeply on that. And of course, we can't also shy away from the fact that there's this idea of epistemic privilege, where there's European appropriation of scientific truths, and what comes from Europe is what is the truth, and that's what we build on as part of our decolonial research. Because we think about theories, you know, that when you started, you said you are not going to talk about the theories and definitions, but you are going to talk about people's perceptions, the context. Indeed, you can't skip that angle, no matter how hard you try, because we don't really have any authentic decolonial research methodologies, unfortunately. So how do we contextualize our idea of progress then, our idea of growth, our idea of knowledge, without propagating what is a whitewashed colonial conception of anything? That's a task that we all need to reflect on. And even as we do this research, as we engage with the people, without pretending to have some, to superintend over some, ideal, some egalitarian idea, there's a certain concept of decolonial research that is the truth and ideal and objective. I don't think there's anything like that, because of what we have. Even the fact that we are having this conversation in this space means we need to think critically about. Another question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the end goal of this decolonial research we are doing? One response could be that we want to have to effectively establish a homogeneous intellectual culture that supersedes some local, local knowledges, that a grand idea of decolonial research. Are we not really just imposing some Western concept of that grand and undermining the indigenous, the diversities within societies, within African context, within non-Western societies? Is that not what we are really doing? Are we really challenging anything at all? That's a question we need to ask. Unfortunately, we don't have the answer. Even if we pretend we do have the answers, I don't think we do. Because in the end, what happens is that there's a problem of incommensurability and intercultural relativism, which necessarily should be part of this conversation. But how do we do that within Western universities, within Western knowledge systems, within within that context of that universalism, I'm not saying it is wrong. I'm just saying what we say we are doing really is just consolidating Western ideas that really is not decolonizing anything, but giving root and legitimacy to what we are really fighting. And I think I'll end here for now.
Thank you very, very much for that, Clement. Yeah, and you can see we have with us a PhD scholar indeed, really, stepping towards that PhD very rapidly. Clement, thank you so much. Again, I am very proud. These are, I will keep saying this, so prepare to keep hearing that these are all, members of the ALC family, those who have studied with us.
Yeah, of course. Yes, and I'm very proud of that as well. Thanks.
Listen to the quality there from the presenters to our discussant here. Clement, thank you so much for that. A lot of this debate and discussion has generated so many comments, so many questions that we're going to pop into. I'm not going to abuse my privileges too much, even though I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to. I want to just pick on maybe big themes that we've heard from our discussants and from the presentation as well, and then open the floor for conversation. Let me begin with what Clement has laid out for us there. And the very big point, the very big question about what is this anyway? In a sense, it's this debate, this agenda around decolonization, is it just a woke facet to consolidating Western knowledge and what Clement refers to as the epistemic privileges that suggest that science is rooted in the West? Is that what we are just replicating when we engage with this space? And what is the end goal of all of this? Is the end goal another form of hegemony that suggests this is how everything should be done? To what extent is that decolonizing if we do away with all the flavors and all the layers that are in all of these parts of, however you want to term it, the global South, majority world? Are we risking another form of hegemony? And to what extent is that actually challenging, what we're critiquing here as sort of centering knowledge as being Western? Very big point there. I love how everyone has reflected on meaning making, and our presenters themselves. I saw in the chat people questioning, but you have to define it, but they haven't done that. And they've done something very fascinating, which is to ask those that they were speaking to actually share how they understand what decolonization is. And we hear Clement pick that up by saying, what is this? If there's anything that's sure, is the fact that there isn't clarity, and maybe there shouldn't be clarity. Maybe there shouldn't be clarity around what decolonization actually is, but actually taking this from the angle of how all these various participants are thinking about it, I think was very courageous. And I think it's very forward thinking as well, right? It's very forward thinking. It can be murky and messy, and as researchers, sometimes we don't like that, but that's the reality. Why are we going to pigeonhole a lot of these fascinating points we've heard by confining them to what decolonization ought to be? And hearing all these different ideas has been really, really significant and very important. There's a point that's been made about location, and we see this in the comments as well. Clement refers to this a lot. It's an especially pertinent conversation to be having at King's College London. The colleagues in the chat that have said, what about African perspectives on this? So the location of these conversations, what color does that bring to these debates? And I think as a corollary to that, our presenters have made a lot of reference to who was speaking, right? Whose voices are here. They haven't flattened it. They've given us the range of that variety so that we can see the complexity in the results that they've shared or the findings that they've shared. And I guess how important is that? Actually understanding who is saying what, right? How important is that to this enterprise? A final point I want to note is, of course, this project has focused deliberately on postgraduate researchers. And our presenters said to us that they believe this is a space, or this is a constituency that is under researched. It's a space where the voices here are not often very amplified. And that suggests that these voices should be amplified, should be very important, And so for me, I'd also like to hear, why are we focused on this constituency? What is it that's particular about this group? So with that, having abused my privileges, let me continue to encourage people to please add in some questions. Damilola and Lorena, I'm just going to, you've heard all of these comments. Pick out what you would like to speak to, respond to. Some are just comments. You're not obliged to respond to all of that, but I'm just going to flag some of the questions that have been coming through. So we have one that says, define the concept of decolonizing research. Perhaps you can also speak to that. What is this point about definitions? We've heard you, Clement has spoken about this, but colleagues want you to define it. What do you have to say to that? I'm not asking you to define it, but what is your response to a request to define it? Okay. Let me take another point that's made here. The extent of the reliability of your findings, given the low participation for those for whom decolonization is paramount. And I think this speaks to Damilola's point around the dominant groups in your sample. Okay, so what do we do with this research if it's still dominated by particular groups of people? Is it still useful? Okay, maybe take those two first. Our presenters, Clement, if at any point there are a point you want to add in, please don't be shy, and let's hear from you as well. Let me leave that with you, colleagues. Let's hear back. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Eka. I think I can respond to your end question, which was why postgraduate students, and also kind of speak to definitions of decolonizing methodologies in that sense. I mean, being postgraduate student at King's myself, I feel like when we do discuss research, or when research is given, we're often in and out almost. So it's actually good to focus on postgraduates, because these are the students you're turning out into the world, into spaces where we have to speak about different lenses, different theories, etc. And I feel like even with master's students, sometimes they're in for a year and then they're out. So what have you gained from your understanding of methodology within that year, or within the couple of years that you have actually studied, being a PhD student? So I feel like this is why we wanted to study postgraduate students, because they'll be able to give us a unique understanding of what methodology looks like through their eyes, almost. So I think that's the kind of reason why we chose that specific group of people. But also in terms of decolonizing methodologies, I know there's a lot of central understandings about it moving away from the West and etc. But I actually think it's more to do with unthinking and then rethinking, or unlearning and then relearning, in a sense. So it's kind of just learning to unlearn to relearn, in a sense, if that makes sense. So I think it's about breaking down our understanding at a root level, and just knowing that there are those power dynamics or those imbalances that can potentially impact our research, and kind of drawing a line under it and recognizing where they come from, in a sense. So I think I've kind of spoken to those two. I don't know if we'll be able to cut in.
Yeah, I don't want to. I believe you have already addressed that side of the questions appropriately. So there's no need for me to repeat anything as regards that. But Eka asked some questions. Presented some questions from the chat box about something that I can summarize as so what. Because Tokpe asked a question: what then are the implications of this study? Especially given the fact that results it's more in favor of the Western than the African research orientation. But what I want to say, and any other questions related to that question that they asked, what I want to say to that is that, so what? I mean, having studied all this, so what are the implications? This is a kind of exploratory study. We are just trying to assess the perception of people or students rather, in colonial, in institutions that are based in former colonial states, really. So we are not trying to impose our own meaning on whatever some of the results from there. So we are aligned that we want the results to speak for them, the results to speak for themselves. But going forward, what we had in mind really is to use this upon completion of the study. We intend to open this for further discussions and workshops for people to contribute and be able to drive their own, to be able to derive their own insights from the data generated from the survey eventually. So we don't want to impose our own meanings or our own interpretation or understanding for now on some of the results we are getting. But the implication of this is very, very, it's important. The study of this nature is important really, because if you are going to, if you understand methodology as context dependent, as a value leading concept, then you understand that you can't be said to be doing research in the social sciences if the context of the people you are studying or the people carrying out the research is not well understood. So, because if you are using specific Western ideas or Western understanding or Western, I don't want to say existentialism, to understand whatever, to interpret or to impose your own meaning into the data you are getting, then that will be very, very problematic. So we want to add to the questions that people have been asking. And then somebody asks another question that is related to that what is the end goal of the colonial project? Something that we've seen from that findings, we noticed that the absence of data sets, the absence of data set archives, and access of even journal databases, these are very big issues, especially for those on the continent from Africa. Now, we need to do what the Chinese did, really. It's for us to create specific platform and establish our own, a standard that is going to be a standard or several standard databases that are not going to be mediocre, but that will be able to compete favorably with some of these databases across the globe. And also to be able to encourage researchers to patronize some of these databases and make our content also open, because there's no sense in you carrying out a research on Africa and then keeping your findings and your result and data sets in databases located in Europe and America, where communities who could benefit will not even have access to them. So, and then it's just like self-promotion, you feel fulfilled on your own, but you are not really contributing really to the advancement of knowledge as you should. So what we are trying to advocate is also, because we have a data lab at the ALC, we are doing that. We are trying, that's why I asked that you could bring a kind of suggestion up. And our intention is from this particular seminar and subsequent seminars and workshops, we might have various ideas. If you have any idea on how we can go about it, but chief of which is to start with having our own databases. There's no point in people going to Scopus and Web of Science to find out, you go to Europe to find out about Africa. We need to have our own, our own Acivia, our own JSTOR, our own Google Scholar, because that's how we can make our knowledge available. That's about our knowledge availability. About methodology, we need to develop, while we are not dismissing every form of methodologies generated or methodological approaches generated in the West or theories generated in the West, but we have to understand that social theories are not, general theory are not we cannot say they are givens in that sense that, okay, they are not set in stone. So we need to start developing our own theories from our own experiences, rather than applying theories generated from Europe or America, really. So lastly, for now, I will pause, but somebody asked a question, I think it's Kivian. It would have perhaps been good, given this time, do you think the findings are reliable in spite of the low participation of people for whom decolonization is perhaps paramount? Also, could you clarify the low participation of Black people, even from the King's community? I think I need to emphasize this. I mentioned that in passing in my presentation. What we noticed is that generally, for now, I don't want to speak authoritatively about that. That's the place of literature on this, the position of literature on this particular behavior. But what we notice is that despite our attempts to even reach out to students, even from the ALC, to participate, or to, many of them did not even bother to even complete this questionnaire or survey. So, and it's not only about this alone. People have written around that's why people seem not to be interested in some of this. So people have their own hypothesis about that, but I cannot speak authoritatively on that. Neither can this. I mean, the objective of this research is not to provide solution to that particular problem, but I think it's also problematic in that sense. As regards the findings, we mentioned that this is not conclusive. So we are just trying to get feedback, and then if there are opinions and suggestions on how we can improve upon the survey going forward, we welcome that. So we are not going to make any conclusive or affirmative statements from this project yet. But we understand that low participation, I mean, we have very serious issues with low participation. And then lastly, it would have perhaps been good given them to try and solicit more participation from spaces where the decolonisation of research is very important, such as in Africa. We are also open to that. We want to we want to open this research to leaders. If you are interested, you are free to join us on the project. It's also important for us not only to study from this side, it will be important to also look at other institutions, maybe in America, in Europe, and also on the continent of Africa, because we can't be discussing, like Clement mentioned, research methodologies, and then we are discussing that from a place like Kings alone. We need to externalize this and also bring people from on the continent to also participate. So I'll pause for now.
Thank you very much for that, for those very comprehensive comments, Damilola. I'll pick up two additional points that have come up. You referred to one slightly as you spoke, and colleagues, I think I'll bunch up a few questions, are asking, why do you think that, the suggestion here is that a lot of these debates are going on to a lesser degree in parts of the African continent. I would not say people have said it on the continent, but I think there's some parts of the continent where there are very vibrant conversations around this. But there's a general observation from colleagues here that, if we think across the continent, this doesn't appear to come up as a very key concern. So, what do you have thoughts? You don't have to, but because you didn't look at that, but do you have thoughts as to why that might be the case? And then someone also asked here, is it possible, let me see, Nara's question, is it possible for white Westerners to conduct decolonized research in the global South or the South in the North? Or should they stick to research in the white global North itself? Obviously, I think it's more layered than this. But if you have any comments on those, perhaps we can hear that too. Thank you. Clement, as I said, please feel free to jump in. Thanks.
Yeah, you want us to respond now?
Yes, please, if that's all right.
Okay. I'm going to respond to that last one. Then maybe Lorena or Clement can react to the other questions that you raised about whether researchers can do. My response would be to that question around whether global North people can do research on decolonization or some decolonized research, studying people from the global North studying the South or from the global South studying the North. I think research generally, this is not part of what it's not part of our remit anyway, but it's also in a way very associated. It's coming from the colonization studies, research of some of the problems highlighted in colonization studies, really. I want to believe that any scientist can study any subject, but what my own position is on that particular view is that very so often it's because you are looking at social science themes and not necessarily science. Because science is given a kind of universal theories or universal law. Gravity is gravity everywhere, wherever you are located, whether it's in America or anywhere. But when you're looking at social themes, it's very, very problematic, especially when people from outside of that community try to study. It's not bad to study them if you're a European studying African issues or something. But what is problematic is if you don't understand the experience of the people, the tendency for you to interpret or to impose your meaning on whatever data you are seeing is very, very high. And that will breed bias along the line. So to serve as a kind of control for that, you might want to include, whether you are studying from the south, not from the south or south from the north, to include not as participant observant alone, but to include, to collaborate with local experts on the ground. That would help you to be able to make sense of the data you are generating. And as regards theoretical considerations, a very key point that I always refer to is when people talk about poverty within the context of European development, in the subject of development, and they attribute poverty to Africa, or to dismiss some of, without using some of these Marxist theories about, okay, Marxism, society, like that idea of a society moving in linear progression from agrarian society to feudalist society, and what have you. Use that European historical trajectory, really. In Africa, for instance, feudalism as experienced in Europe and as explained by Marx never existed, at least from my own part of Africa anyway, where you had some people not owning land at all. And then they had to depend on some lords. And then, yeah. So we had people who, most of the experiences in Africa is that most people had land. They never experienced that concept. And even when Karl Marx tried to impose hierarchical considerations on how society is structured using European, using European explanations or experiences, universalizing European experiences. It's also problematic because when you go among the pygmies in Congo, they operate a kind of egalitarian societies where there are no social hierarchies as such. So it will be problematic for anybody to now impose Karl Marx's idea to explain how society is structured in Africa. Not that it won't provide insight, but it will be problematic really in that sense. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that universalizing or building grand theories, imposing grand theories from Europe on Africa will be highly problematic. So if that study could be carried out, bearing in mind some of the context and nuances surrounding whatever data is available, then that would likely that it's possible to study either of the two words anyway. So those are my own observations on that subject. I will allow Lorena and Clement to react to the other points.
Hi, thanks, Damiola. Just adding to your point, I believe, which was the last question on should they study in these spaces, I presume. I feel like it's a question of positionality as well and reflexivity, because some of the responses from our participants in the virtual focus groups where they are studying in the global south, they want to move away from that white savior narrative. So they were more open to looking at potential decolonized methods to do that in a sense. But I also feel like you've got to confront these things up front as well and kind of figure out where you place yourself. I think it's asking those key important questions of who are the beneficiaries of your research, or how are you participating in that sense? Do you understand the experiences? And if you don't, how can you? I feel like even myself in my current research, I feel like this is an important question because I am British, obviously, but I conduct research in Jamaica, which is where I'm from, So it's kind of that insider-outsider perspective as well. And I feel like looking at that and looking at it from that sense as well, it also opens that question of why we need decolonized methodologies in that sense. I think it can help break down some of those barriers that we face with questions like that. And in terms of, I believe the question was regarding why it's not studied more on the African continent, I feel like this can actually be addressed by a comment given in our focus group discussion, where a participant said there's always, when associated with research, I suppose, I think is a key kind of point. She said, when we study in the West, there's also an element of shame. And decolonization kind of helps undo that shame almost. And I think that was a really interesting comment to give. I feel like it's very understanding in a sense that they want to move away from that. And maybe, again, on the African continent, it's not a pertinent issue, but it would be a pertinent issue for a Western institution that's associated with colonialism and those kind of aspects. I don't know if Clement has anything more to add to that question, but I just thought that observation is quite interesting regarding that question.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for rehashing that question. And I think the responses from you, Lorena and Damilola, really spot on. I mean, I definitely there's a problem we need to face head on if what we are seeing, and that's the case really, is that we are not having this conversation on the continent, and that it's more like a Western project than an indigenous project. But that already speaks to the question of what really is decolonial research. And I can't overstate that question. Do we really mean making research accessible? Like, do we really mean making indigenous people part of research and knowledge production? Or do we mean using non-Western methods to do research? Do we mean like using storytelling, for instance? Because for an indigenous person whose interest we claim to be speaking to, for them, storytelling is their thing. They tell the story as it is, they describe things and move on. But will that be enough in the universities in which we study? And even if the university is in Africa, they are all modeled along this Western ideas of scientific knowledge production, which really already creates a dualism in the space, that already alienates people. And even as we say we are doing decolonial research, we are looking at indigenous knowledges that can be refined to the standard of the West, So yeah, already the standard for measuring what is decolonial research methodology alienates the actual decolonial methodology because of the nature of it, the space in which we have the conversation. So that's why I keep asking, what exactly do we want to achieve? Do we just want the elites in the Western societies to feel relevant and connected to our roots? Or we want to project something? What exactly? It's not very clear to me. And I know, David, you made very brilliant points about some of the existing authors, African writers who make very brilliant contributions to the discussion on decolonial research and decolonial research methodologies. Definitely positionality, very important, as Lorena said, because you can understand it better. And even if you don't understand it, your background already gives a certain bias to the conversation, and that's definitely very necessary. But then the question I just have not found an answer to, and I don't think we can answer it now, is what's the end? What do we want to achieve? Are we hoping to carry people along? Are we hoping to produce indigenous knowledges for who? Are the people we are claiming to be speaking for interested in these kinds of knowledges that we are producing? The kinds of knowledges that is scientific, that's designed to be scientific in the Western concept, that set the questions, that's the analysis, that's the discussions, and that's the conclusions. What's the use of that to the indigenes that we are hoping to speak on behalf of? So I mean, it's still an evolving question. This is an important project. I cannot overstate that. But I think we need to challenge, scratch the surface a little bit more and go beyond, our comfort zone of this Western scientific knowledge production.
Thank you very much for that, Clement, to Damilola and Lorena as well. And I think this touches on a very fantastic points being made in the chat. I'm not able to touch on all of them, but this final point that Clement has made, I think speaks to one of the one of the comments here that's asking, is it possible to build a collaborative research area that's culturally appropriate, respectful, and honoring of African community? And in a sense, it's linking to what Clement is saying about what is, what is at the center of this conversation about decolonization, the Academy of Research Methodologies, and to what end? What are we aiming towards? I think another comment there is asking that, apart from trying to establish a homogeneous intellectual concept or approach to accommodate marginalized communities, what are the goals of decolonizing research methodology? And I think from the conversations we're having, a point is being made about how problematic a goal of establishing a homogeneous intellectual concept or approach is. If we take that as a starting point, we're being challenged on even visioning this as a starting point for this conversation. I think what is very clear is, and I think Clement reflects on this a great deal, the layered space that this is, and the fact that it has to remain complex and complicated. And if we're trying to simplify, is that really decolonizing, right? And I think he speaks, I think, very eloquently about the tension between measuring progress on the basis of what we've been gifted, as it were, gifted in quotation marks, as to what development and progress looks like. And I think if you think of the work of post-development theorists, a lot of that critique is around that. So on the one hand, we're progressing along that side, and on the other hand, we're talking about decolonization. And he's asking, do we mean just picking out a few methods so we can tick that box? I think this is a very fundamental question that should sort of remain with us as we reflect on what's going on. Let me see. Shuvai, did you have your hand up? Sorry. Whose hand is that?
It shows as my hand, but it's Prof. O. I think she wants to say something. Okay, please.
You have a few moments.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I'm sharing this link with Shuvai, and I'm trying to multitask at the same time. I have been so really engrossed in the conversation. I have tried to shut up, and I thought, I need to speak. I think a really amazing conversation. And I think that as Africans, as African, Caribbeans, British, Blacks, whatever it is we call ourselves, who, clamor for, argue for decolonizing, whatever it means to us, whether we see it from a historical perspective or we see it in terms of the power imbalances in our classrooms, whatever it is that drives us. What this research and the conversations, is still ongoing, this research, and the conversations we've had today underscore for me very powerfully, and they have always done. And I almost think that we're running out of time if we don't interject in this debate very solidly, is that the individual, Black, white, African, whatever it is, requires a new kind of scrutiny and self-reflection in order to develop an awareness, a really critical awareness of what our place is in the world, what we want to affect, what we need to change, and how actually we can be in charge of our own destinies and actually problem solve together. Global problems are problems without passports that affect us as individuals and our societies very, very, very strongly. And the challenge for me about decolonizing, the decolonizing conversations we're having at the moment, is that, our goose, as it were, our collective goose is baked if we don't interrogate our minds. So we're seeing in this result that as Africans even, there's nothing to indicate that it's the few Africans who signed up to this, and I take the point, that are thinking like that. But as a global majority, those numbers indicate that we are using the very systems of oppression that we claim to be systems of oppression to actually interrogate our own thought. How messed up is that, actually? But where do we run? Is it an institutional thing, the location? Because if we're saying we want to alter the power dynamics even in the institution, because we're collaborating on global problem solving with other people from the global South and North. If we all went to the University of Cape Town today or University of Nairobi today, will our fates be different? And I think not, because if you read Sylvia Tamale's work, the African University itself was constructed as a colonial project. So we need to just really do, to my mind, a complete outside the box thinking to say, how do we do three things? How do we get a concrete view of self? And that's what Peter da Costa was talking about in his work, when he says that even the very Africans that preside over the institutions on behalf of the World Bank and others, they themselves are instruments of the same colonial construct. So we need to scrutinize ourselves completely about who we are and what we want out of life and the problems that we're trying to solve. The second thing, though, is we need to come to terms with this question of institution, to ask a fundamental question about, the work that we're doing. How do we do work that helps shape our destinies differently? Because really it's about our individual and collective destinies. If we have to do that work, we have to rethink the very basis of the kinds of problems, that we're trying to solve. What's the point of trying to solve a governance problem on the continent of Africa that has a sociocultural context that is so dominant, and we superimpose a Western idea on it? So we ourselves are the problem, are the fundamental problems before we look at those institutions. Thirdly, I think in the 21st century, we have to think about what is decolonial as what allows us to not just disrupt power dynamics, but also to work together to solve problems that actually do not belong in one particular border. The challenge that faces us is so great. And I think that we need to go to the drawing board. It's not just Gasheni's work or Tamale's work. It is who we are in relation to all those things. It's not just about speaking the language, speaking the language for the sake of speaking the language. We need to disrupt more fundamentally. I'm sorry to take this space. I just have been very inspired by the conversation. Thank you. I think there's more work that needs to be done. This thing is only the tip of the iceberg. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that intervention. I saw one more hand that I'm going to call up now so that we wrap up. But thank you very much for that intervention. I thought it was so critical. A lot of what you said. There are also some great resources that have been put in the chat. But I really appreciated your final point that it's not replicating even those things we're hearing. And it takes me back to Clement's point about whether this is another project about hegemony of knowledge and how that is implementing a sort of hegemonic sense of what knowledge really is. What is Africa? So it's challenging us on this. So I feel like we're going back to that question about what is fundamental about what it is we're trying to do here. Another point I want to raise, there's so many amazing comments here, so do excuse me if I don't raise yours. It's fantastic, but this just links to what has been said now as well. And a comment around how can we really solve problems that are faced by African countries if we keep choosing to rely on Western research and theories. And I raise this comment because it speaks about agency, the extent to which we can negotiate and what is being done around the negotiation. Here I almost hear a suggestion of intellectual laziness around this. What effort will we make? Because it won't fall on our laps. Those theories are available, but work has to be done to look for alternatives. It won't just happen, right? So thank you very much for that. I see Tayo Odetade's hand up. Please, can you speak? I apologize. I think your hand has been up a while.
Okay, I have a question, or let me say a comment, because this issue of decolonizing our methodologies, I don't know, African scholars, I think we need to redefine the issue of methodology, because if we keep complaining that we are not going to use Western methodologies, then I feel fashion out our own set of methodological principles, because even in literature, I'm in literature. I specialize in literature and English in my university. And we keep complaining about using Western literary theories. And then, if we are not going to use that, how many African scholars or theorists are developed theories that are universal in nature, like those Western theories. That's my submission. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So apart from that, another thing is that I'm thinking of ways in which there can be a collaboration.
Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that. Thank you for that.
All right, all right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, you were saying something about collaboration.
Yes, I was really talking about the issue of collaborating about this in the course of this research. I don't know, is it really domiciled in King's College, or is there an avenue to collaborate with other scholars in African universities? That's my submission.
Oh, okay, thank you for that, Tayo. Okay, thank you so much, Tayo. I think Damola mentioned before that the next phase, they're really looking forward to expanding and this work. On your first point, we're coming to the end, so I think responses will be difficult at this point, but I just want to reflect on what colleagues have said, actually, that the idea that theories are universal actually is at the root of, you know, the need for a decolonization agenda. That are there other ideas that are universal in nature, and actually the rejection of that brings us here. But the later point you make about what are the alternatives, and someone has said here those have to, you know, some of those exist. A colleague, David, has put out some research that is showing colleagues that are already doing some of this work. So that work is going on. But we have also been challenged that the idea is not simply to take on work that has been done and just replicate that again. Yeah, we need to broaden that. We need to think of heterogeneity in all of this, pluralism in all of this. And that means the idea of universalism is one that it seems to me, from what our colleagues have
said. Thank you. Can they hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I've lost my internet access. So I've just come to say thank you so much for having come. I think this was an incredible conversation we had. We're going to have a next one next month. So wait to get the news about that. We'll be sending that on our, all our networks. So you'll see the information for the next seminar. Let me say huge thank you to Damlola Adegoke, Lorena Johnson-Prince, and of course, Clement Sefanyako for that amazing discussion. Thank you so much for inspiring us to address so many incredible issues. Congratulations, I'm seeing there. Thank you so much for that. All those that have been so active in the chat, the questions, even those listening, we really appreciate that. All those who have shared resources, David, I see you there. Thank you so much for that. As you heard, this is a project that's ongoing. There's scope for wider collaboration and things like that. So please watch this space. We're going to be carrying on with all of that. My apologies, my internet got disconnected. That's why I'm here. But thank you so much for being with us today. Look after yourselves and do please stay safe. Okay, goodbye.